إذا كررت هذه العملية بعد أشهر
Good morning everyone. اسمي فرح شموت وراح أحكي بالإنجليش إذا سمحتوا عشان راح يكون أسهل أشرح المصطلحات اللي أنا بشتغل عليها. To start with, I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford. I'm about to finish my second year and my research focuses on machine learning applications in healthcare. بس قبل ما أبلش مين هون بعرف إيش machine learning أو سامع machine learning من قبل؟ اوكي few. طيب مين هون في حدا هون دكتور او نيرس او بيشتغل بمستشفى او biomedical engineering biomedical اوكي وانت مختبرات انت student اوكي فيعني هيك بيكون شوي من الاودينس بيكونوا شوي فاهمين ايش عم بيصير ممكن نساعد بعض. Actually it's good انه we have a small space because it means we might have a more intimate conversation, so if at any point you have a question please stop me. Okay, now to begin with, this whole presentation, I just want to share with you why I think the intersection of healthcare and artificial intelligence is actually a very, very, very exciting area, especially now with the increase in big data and the increase in resources, and as Dr. Sanad pointed out in the morning, also the developments in hardware, and this all allows those developments to occur. So, to begin with, this is the world map, but it's a different version of the world map. This world map is resized according to the number of doctors who are working in each country per population. So as you can notice that in some countries, especially where we are, over here, the proportion of physicians to population is actually low. And this is very concerning because it means the demand for healthcare is not being met. And the World Health Organization actually has shown that in the next decade or so, the number of physicians, including doctors and nurses, is going to decline, which even makes the situation worse. So instead of spending money and pouring more money into traditional public health approaches, we need to start looking into more unconventional approaches that actually take advantage of technologies. So this whole presentation focuses on decision-making in healthcare. Now, what is decision-making? This is one definition, and it's the processes by which people make and draw conclusions, reach evaluations, and make choices. So it's all about making a choice. But you need to keep in mind that all health outcomes are probabilistic. So when you go to a doctor and the doctor tells you you're diagnosed with some specific disease, the outcomes are always surrounded by some uncertainty. The doctor is never 100% sure. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. And thus, all the decisions are made under conditions of probability and uncertainty. Now, one study divided decisions made in healthcare into two types. The first type are decisions made by the provider on the behalf of the patient. And the second type are decisions that are shared between the provider and the patient. Now, I kept this blank on purpose. Now, clinical deterioration. My research mainly focuses on clinical deterioration. And it's basically defined as the worsening of the health condition of a patient, which may lead to preventable adverse events. Now, there's a lot of talk about preventable adverse events because in those cases, there's actually enough information for the clinical staff to make the right decision. But the issue lies is that they actually don't have efficient computing power or the time to make such decision. So for example, I want to give an example of a patient. So I want a name of someone who isn't here. So can I have name suggestions? Sorry? Adile. Any Adiles in the room? لا. So let's suppose Adila is a patient, okay? She got admitted into the hospital. She unfortunately has late stage of lung cancer. She also has 2 drug reactions, so she gets allergies from medicine. She also has a few other comorbidities, so let's say she has blood pressure or diabetes. And she also has previous hospital admissions that haven't been recorded in the hospital she currently got admitted to. And now the doctor needs to make a decision about Adile, while at the same time making decisions for at least 7 other patients. So you can imagine how complex the context is. So some preventable adverse events, for example, are strokes, heart attacks, unplanned ICU admission, or even mortality. Some of those events are all preventable. So this is an example of a patient's snapshot that has 5 vital signs. So the patient's heart rate, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, temperature, and so on. And then over time, so this is the patient got admitted here, and then over time you can see that the patient's physiology is actually escalating, and then the patient gets admitted into ICU. So the whole purpose of our work is to actually attend to this patient earlier so we can avoid the unplanned ICU admissions. Okay? And Adile is just an example. So to redefine, and going back to the decision-making in healthcare, the future of decision-making in healthcare involves both people and the machines. Because in our time, we need to take advantage of the machine's computing power, memory, attention span, and so many other factors where the machine actually supersedes the human, and the process can only be complementary. So that finally, this is the future of healthcare, which I believe that the shared decision for a patient will be made by the provider, the patient, and the clinician, and the machine. So what is machine learning in healthcare? Now, machine learning in general, it's a subfield of artificial intelligence where we build algorithms that learn from retrospective data, or that they learn from previous patient histories, in large numbers, of course. And machine learning has been adopted in many different fields, not just healthcare, including day-to-day things that we use, such as Google search or speech recognition. Those are all supported by machine learning algorithms. So you basically have a retrospective training set, so past data of, let's say, patients of the past 4 years admitted to those specific hospitals. And then the model learns if some patterns here. You evaluate your model to make sure that it works well, it's generalizable, you can apply it in several hospitals, and then finally you test it and you get accurate predictions. This is in general what machine learning in healthcare looks like. It's all about the data and the outcomes. So my research focus is mainly on doing personalized patient models, so depending on the patient's, let's say, age or gender and so on. And second, detecting clinical deterioration in fully predictive means before they happen. And I'll give you a few examples. Now, for those of you familiar with AI or machine learning, those are some of the words that I actually hear at least like 10 times when I'm in the lab. So there's Bayesian learning, Gaussian processes, neural networks, and so on. Now, paper medical charts. تفضلوا. Paper medical charts were actually introduced in 1907. And this one specifically was actually from a hospital in Oxford just a few years back. And this just shows you how healthcare, unlike other fields, are actually slow in terms of adapting to new technologies, because there are many different stakeholders in healthcare, not just the patient and the doctor. It's an entire process. Now, in the 1970s, they started introducing the concept of electronic health records. So now they digitize what's on the paper records. And this is an example of the SEND system. So this system is, it was developed by research members of my group in Oxford, and it's now implemented in a few hospitals in Oxford and in other cities. But mainly, which is very simple actually, it's mainly a tablet where the nurses can record patient data. So it's actually very simple, but it's only been implemented in the past few years. So this is an example of what the system may show. So you have the patient data, and then an early warning score, which I'll get into in a bit. So for example, here, this patient has those vital signs, and it's alerting a score of 3. And based on the scores, the hospital staff attend to the patient. So electronic health records, they basically summarize all of the data involved for the patient, of like any data sets, especially, which is also very unique to healthcare data sets, is that they actually include many different data types. So they might have like vital signs, they might have lab events, medications, ward transfers, many different data types and in many different numbers. So when we want to use electronic health records and when we choose to do so, we need to acknowledge that there are actually many challenges that we need to address before we even start working with the data. And those challenges include the complexity of electronic health records and of the healthcare system in general. It's a very complex ecosystem. Completeness of the data. Very often you'll find that some patients have missing variables, and that's because of the healthcare system fragmentation. The nurses and the doctors have to, again, attend to so many patients at the same time, so it's actually an overwhelming process. The correctness, in some patient admissions, we may find that a patient has 500 beats per minute, which is a wrong number, but it was inserted by human error or systematic error. So this is also a typical patient flow, just to illustrate the complexity of the data. So back to our patient, Adila. So let's say Adila came in through the emergency department. And then Adila needs to become an inpatient, but Adila might wait here for a bit. And after Adila gets admitted, she's going to change between multiple doctors. And during the time she's changing between multiple doctors, she's also changing wards. So let's say she gets admitted to one ward, and then she gets transferred to another ward. So it's really, really complex. And then Adila is going to be discharged from the hospital. During that time, all of those data variables are recorded, and so on. So just to give you, for those interested in machine learning in healthcare, just to give you an example of what the workflow of a project may look like. So to begin with, you extract your patient cohort. Let's say I want to build a system that alerts for patients who are in ICU. So step one is to extract patients in the database of previous patients who were admitted into ICU, extract their data. So this first step is basically defining your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So if you're in data science or in machine learning, this is a very common term, inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then the second step would be pre-processing the data. And this goes back to addressing the challenges of the data. So looking for missing values, wrong values, and so on. And finally, in the final process, you can choose how you want to analyze your data. So early warning scores. Early warning scores are systems that have been implemented since a very long time, and they were created through clinical expertise mainly. So the doctors sit together and they decide that if a patient has a heart rate beat less than 20 beats per minute, then this patient should get a score of 3. Now, most of those early warning scores, again, were developed using clinical expertise only, and increasingly now with time they're actually looking at data sets. But despite early warning scores being an additional aid to medical staff, they're very easy to understand and implement, unlike some machine learning models. But sometimes they're not generalizable across different hospitals, which means if you develop an early warning score for hospital 1, you might not be able to use it in hospital 2. They also have limited input variables, and they assume that all patients are similar. So some of the work, going back to this one, some of my work in this field is developing early warning scores using data. So now we're working on an age-specific early warning score that alerts depending on the age of the patient. Because if you're 50 and if you're 20, your vital signs are actually going to act differently. So this is one project. The second project is moving towards machine learning and deep learning. So as I said, if you have vital signs, you're going to have missing variables. So sometimes you use machine learning approaches to actually smoothen the data. So in reality, the patient only has those black data points recorded. So what we do is that we create a smooth curve first. And then after creating the smooth curve, we can get the data points that we're looking for. And then we decide whether the patient needs help or not. So this is a typical process. You start with the raw data, you clean it, you have to clean your data, and then you analyze it, and then you make a decision. And in terms of data cleaning, it's actually very well known that most data science projects or most data scientists spend 80% of their time just cleaning the data and 20% processing it. So a lot of attention needs to be paid onto the process where the data was collected. Now, other than electronic health records and the projects that I've been working on, the benefit of healthcare is that there are actually many, many sources of data. For example, in the pharmaceutical industry, they look at the drug reaction of patients to specific medicines, especially antibiotics. And now there's a big thing about antibiotic resistance because our bodies no longer react to antibiotics. So this is actually a big field of research. There are also MRI and CT scans that are also being processed by deep learning models, but those focus more on imaging. And so on. Wearables, for example. Wearables is another field where you can collect, companies can actually collect data based on your vital signs, movements, how many steps you take per day, and so on. Even your phones, the smartphones and iPhones, they do collect how much you walk per day. So all of this data, the numerous sources of data, we can use it and take advantage of it to actually come up with solutions that can tackle complex healthcare problems. So these are examples of machine learning in healthcare solutions that have been implemented before. So again, SEND is the electronic system that we've developed in Oxford, and it's currently being used. Some hospitals, including some hospitals in Jordan actually, they still use open access electronic health records, which are very, very difficult to use. The storage isn't very clean, so it's time to actually look at how do we store the data in the beginning to start with. How do we build an efficient and useful infrastructure for research? The second type of data collection solutions is self-reported data. So the number of apps are increasing in terms of providing solutions to the patient and to the user to record data themselves. So for example, this project, they ask patients who are on depression medicine to report how are they reacting to this medicine. And based on that, they give them more customized medication pathways. The other type of projects in machine learning in healthcare is the development of diagnostic tools. And diagnostic tools include early warning scores. So how do we alert if a patient is about to have a heart attack or a stroke and so on. And this is another project. I worked on a similar project to this one, which is diagnosing sleep apnea among children. So for sleep apnea is when you're asleep and then you start snoring, and it's very common amongst children, and then you might feel like you're suffocated. So this is sleep apnea in very simple words. But the current measure, the way to diagnose sleep apnea now is actually really expensive. If you want to know you have sleep apnea, you need to go to a hospital and stay there for a night. And over the night, they're going to record measurements every few hours. So it's a really expensive procedure. But in this project, by looking at the patient's age, the patient's weight, the patient's body mass index, or how healthy the patient is, you can actually get a good prediction by just one measurement, instead of sending the patient to a hospital for a night. So those are just examples of how machine learning in healthcare actually doesn't just improve diagnosis, but it also saves us a lot of time. Now, شايفين? Sorry. Now, the third type of machine learning research is prevention. So this is actually a really exciting project. It's in Stanford. And what they did is that they implemented cameras in the washrooms, so in the toilets, that analyze how doctors and the clinical staff wash their hands. Because they found out that a lot of infections that happen in the hospitals are actually due to hand hygiene. So this is one example where they've been collecting, again, imaging data to analyze how the clinical staff's hygiene affects patients. And it's all data-based. This is another project, so it detects, it's for elderly patients to detect if they're going to fall down or not. So this is another example. So overall, if you're interested in healthcare and in technological approaches in healthcare, you really need to define three things. Who are you trying to help? So what type of patient are you trying to help? What are you going to help them with? And where will you intervene? So are you going to intervene in the patient's home? Is it going to be in the public spaces? Is it going to be primary care? So primary care is your first interaction or contact with any healthcare setting. Is it going to be through pharmaceutical companies, pharmacies, or through nursing? So those 3 questions would help you to come up with actually a coherent objective. But actually, one of the things you actually also need to keep in mind is always being in touch with clinicians and clinical staff, because they're the ones who actually know how healthcare works. And if you might come up with an idea and think that it's the best idea in the world, but then when you approach doctors, and this has happened before with myself and others, they'll go like, I really don't need this tool. I'm happy to work with what I have. So really make sure that you're solving real solutions and define your problems in a concise way. So again, you need to make sure that your models work across different hospitals, and this is by evaluating your models. Never build a model and assume that it's the best performing model. It might work on your data, but if you take it into another hospital, it might actually negatively affect many patients. The second thing is that we really, really need to work on the infrastructure to support new technologies. So again, if anyone's interested in healthcare, I know some ventures are starting in Jordan for electronic health records, but we do really need to focus our efforts on building the infrastructure for machine learning in healthcare, which still does not fully exist here. And this doesn't just take engineers. It takes engineers, it takes professors, it takes business people, it takes doctors, and so on. So it's a collaborative effort. And third, this goes back to speaking to clinicians and to doctors, so the human factors approach. So whenever you're building something, you need to keep testing that people are actually going to use it. So for example, with the Sense system and the project that I'm currently working on, they actually have a team dedicated to just making sure that the user is going to use this new tool. This is very, very important. Don't just build things on your own as engineers and really excited computer scientists. You need to make sure that your tool is usable, or otherwise you're just wasting your time. And finally, create solutions that solve real and relevant problems. So if you want to start, the first thing to start with is do your research. Know what the healthcare problems are. There are many, many problems. It's not just clinical deterioration. For example, optimizing the efficiency in the hospital. So like going back to Adila, how many hours is she going to wait in the emergency department? And if she waits these many hours in the emergency department, we could have used them actually to make sure that Adila survives or lives a better and healthier life. So do your research. Collaborate with clinicians. You have to collaborate with clinicians. Start with public data sets. If you don't have access to a data set from a hospital, you can start with really, really well-established data sets. For example, the MIMIC database, it has data of patients in ICU. It's an excellent resource if you want to start machine learning projects in healthcare. There are also other challenges. There's the PhysioNet and cardiology challenge. It's a very interesting challenge. People from all over the world try to solve one problem. So they give them the data set, they tell them what the objective is, and then you need to build a model that performs best. Or you can even simulate your own data. Create artificial data. Just get started. And finally, there are many tools. Python is now more accessible than ever. Even though you might not take a course in class that teaches you Python, there are so many online resources and so many blog posts and so many tutorials, and you can easily just spend a few hours a week to learn Python on your own. And that's it. Thank you for listening. It's been very brief, but I want to open the floor now for questions. Feel free to ask in Arabic or English. That's totally fine. And I'm really, really excited and looking forward to the future of machine learning in healthcare and in tackling really complex healthcare problems. Thank you. Questions? حدا عنده سؤال؟ أو yes.
I'm sorry.
تفضل. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it in use, or is it still in process, or what?
So I'm not sure which project they were talking about, but we have a similar one in our research lab in Oxford, and it's still in research phase. So the way it works, they install cameras, and then based on the heat waves in the room, they can detect heart movements and so on. And then they process them and tell if a patient has a cardiac arrest. But this is still in research phase. But I believe it's going to come into market very, very soon. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Amjad.
So, how do you see the new standards in privacy, data privacy out of the EU that is going to affect healthcare records in the UK and other countries like that?
So are you referring to the GPDR? Yeah. So to be fair, after living in the UK for 2 years now and working with the Haven dataset, especially UK universities, especially the University of Oxford, are actually very, very careful in working with patient data before the GPDR got implemented. So if you want to access this data, the private data sets of hospitals in Oxford, you need to first do a research ethics course, and then you need to attend a one-to-one or in-person session about how to use this data. So first they make sure that you're aware that you can't use this data illegally. So after showing that you're actually using this data for research and purely for the advancement of machine learning and healthcare, they'll still make you fill out a few more forms to make sure that you're going to keep this data safe. Additionally, the way they store the data is also very, very secure. So they actually have servers that are secured physically, not just on the cloud and so on. So I think the GPDR might not have a direct effect on what we're doing because they're already taking the precautions and making sure that everything is secure. But I think the GPDR will have more effects on more publicly accessible data, like data on Facebook or data collected by apps and so on. Hope this answered your question. Yeah. Any other questions? Ask whatever you want. Yes, Saad.
Maybe could you tell us a little bit about the limitations of more like integrating artificial intelligence in healthcare? More about, especially like for a person being, for instance, in Jordan. So what do you think from your perspective would be like one sort of limitations?
Okay, so let's start with limitations not in Jordan first. So limitations outside Jordan. So the limitations we face, one is making sure that this model works for everyone. So this is the first limitation, because the data set you're working with will always be limited. It will always be for 80,000 patients in a city in the UK, in Oxford, that are being admitted to 3 hospitals in Oxford. So it's a very limited data set. That's one. The second thing is actually convincing the medical staff or the clinicians that my model will help you and my model will actually have good outcomes. Because for staff, clinical staff like doctor, who is a doctor here? Any doctors? Yes. So for doctors, correct me if I'm wrong, they're usually hesitant in trusting technologies. So this is also a limitation, but it's also our role to convince them and to show them how these models work. And there's now actually a hot topic in machine learning and deep learning called interpretability. And a lot of research groups are working on making sure that their models are understandable and that they can understand what each variable factor is doing. In Jordan specifically, the limitation, I believe, is the infrastructure. Apart from the machine learning and the algorithms we can build, we still don't have the infrastructure for data collection. And for example, in the UK, it took them a lot of years to actually get there, but it needed a lot of human effort and people who believed that this infrastructure will help them. So the limitation now is data in Jordan, and second, awareness amongst the youth or engineers or rising machine learning scientists that healthcare is a really, really impactful field that does need this infrastructure. And then they'll push for it. Yeah. انتوا اسألوا أسئلة الصغار. يس. لا مش مشكلة. لا ولا. سوري ما سمعت. عشان يعمل قرار بالضبط، بس مش انه الماشين بيعمل القرار إله، بيساعده يعمل القرار. مثلا على سبيل المثال انا باجي بحكي انا ماشين وحكيت للدكتور انه هذا المريض 70% ممكن بده يدخل ICU، فالدكتور هلا اذا بده يعطيه ادويه او اذا بده يبعته محل ثاني او اذا بده يروحه على البيت بقرر انه لا انا هذا المريض ما حروحه على البيت حخليه شوي عندي تحت المراقبه بالضبط. او يمكن الممرضات لازم يصيروا يشوفوه، اذا كانوا يشوفوه كل ساعتين لازم يصيروا يشوفوه كل نص ساعه. فهو بيساعد الدكتور يعمل قرارات بس ما ببدل دور الدكتور. هذا إشي كتير مهم، انه احنا ما بنهدف انه to replace the machine with the doctor. لا، احنا بدنا the machine and the doctor to work together، يكونوا يشتغلوا مع بعض. You're welcome. Yes. Mm-hmm. I highly recommend everyone to learn more about data science because it's all around us nowadays. But we also, like, there's a lot of hype now around AI, machine learning, big data, blockchain, like those are the trendy words. But we also need to keep in mind that the foundational research, like the basic physics and chemistry and biology, those are also really important. And we shouldn't ignore those fields just for the sake of AI and data science and so on. But it's always beneficial to have this additional skill and to develop an additional skill of data science because it's the trend now. But it's totally up to you. I would highly encourage it, especially if you're looking into a change in career, for example. But we also shouldn't neglect the basic scientific research and other subjects. Yes. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 كثير حلو سؤالك. سألت إنه إذا حدا عنده فيلد مش بإنجينيرينج أو بديتا ساينس مثلا زي فارماسي وحابب يدخل على هذا المجال، هل بيقدر يعمل PhD بدون ماسترز؟ هلا الإشي كثير بيعتمد على الكيس اللي إحنا عم نحكي عنها. إذا شخص عامل فارماكولوجي مثلا وبده يدخل ماشين ليرنينج، you need to keep in mind إنه PhD it's a lot of self motivation. يعني أنت رح تتعلمي كل إشي لحالك، ما في حدا يساعدك أو في طبعا ناس تقدر تسأليهم، بس it's a lot of self motivation and this is very difficult. هلا one of the things that you can do to save yourself time and to actually learn faster is to do a master's, just to learn the basic tools. يعني تعرف كيف تستعمل basic tools. إذا ما قدرتي وعندك يعني the motivation or you want to learn them both ways with and without a master, then it's all up to you and it's all about self-motivation. وفي كورسيرا مثلا إنه هاي it's a website عندهم كتير courses بتقدر تتعلموا عليهم، و PhDs كتير بتطلعوا على research experience. So if you have research experience من قبل, they can the likelihood of getting admitted is higher. يعني مثلا أنا قبل ما أروح على هاي PhD ما كنت عاملة machine learning أو data science، بس كنت متعلمة بايثون و some coding languages بالجامعة لأني درست computer engineering، بس ما كنت عاملة machine learning specifically، بس my research experiences ساعدوني إني أدخل على PhD. حسب الجامعة. مثلا بأكسفورد if you have research experience مو شرط تكون في ماسترز، حسب الجامعة هم as long as that they can make sure إنه you're going to succeed in your PhD أو يعني ما رح تعاني كتير بال PhD، ما عندهم مشكلة. You're welcome. Yes. Mm-hmm.
For example, I come from the education,
Mm-hmm.
specifically in tourism and hospitality, which is the most applied
Mm-hmm.
field or area of knowledge. From your experiences, how can we integrate this learning, talk about the big data, the
Mhm.
intelligence and use it in the educational process
Mhm.
to build the skills of building skills in students.
Okay. Very good question. هلا بس قصدك education of students أو بhospitality و tourism؟ الاثنين.
I'm dealing with the sector of hospitality
Ah.
that requires applied training and applied learning.
Okay.
So it's very specific.
Mhm.
And this is what we lack.
Mhm.
Mostly experience and
Mhm.
to upgrade it and to improve it.
Mhm.
We need to improve the learning.
Definitely.
And now the artificial intelligence were highly used
Mhm.
in tourism and hospitality.
Mhm.
How do you think from your experience it could be used in education?
هلا personally
How did you learn, for example?
the way how did I learn? Yes, so when I started my PhD, I did not know a lot about machine learning. I knew what it is, but I didn't know how to use it specifically. And most of the learning was really self-taught. I read a couple of books. I took the Intro to Machine Learning course on Coursera. Again, please, anyone who's interested in machine learning, take this course. It's basic, but it's a good introduction. And I also started speaking to people who do machine learning. Education itself, using machine learning in the way you educate people, I think is also a rising field, because in our schools, the way we take classes, and يعني بالمدرسة إنه في 7-8 مواد لازم ناخدهم كلهم ونحفظهم كلهم نعمل منيح فيهم كلهم. بس I believe that the future of education زي ما هلا في برامج بتخليك تختاري مثلا 6 مواد بس من 10. I believe that the future of education, machine learning will help it in customizing the education based on the student. مثلا هذا الستودنت عم بحل أسئلة، بدل ما الأستاذ يجي يصلح ويقول له خلص خذ ورقتك، the system would tell him إنه solve more questions of this specific area or subject. It will basically reinforce what the student should focus on. It's all based on the previous data of the student. بس بhospitality و tourism في مثلا شركات طيران هلا they customize your next flights or their recommendations or suggestions based on your previous travel history. يعني انتم ما تفكروا هلا بس تفتحوا على الملكية، ما بعرف اذا الملكية، بس اذا بتفتحوا على ويب سايت طيران ما بعرف ايش هم، يعني حسب اكس بيستعمل ماشين ليرنينج، رح يكون هو بتطلع ايش ويب سايتس انت فتحتهم من قبل، where did you travel before. It will process all of your history to actually make a recommendation، مش بس بالdestinations بس برضه بالسعر. فإن hospitality it's وتوريزم عم بزيد كتير، كل شيء بالضبط. سو هلا يعني ماشين ليرنينج كتير عم بيستعملوه ببزنسز انهم يحسنوا من business performance و to make more profits. يعني apart from healthcare, AI is used to make profits, more revenues, decrease costs. يعني له business عالم إشي تاني. I hope it answered your question. Thank you. Yes. صح. هلا this is true. وأنا صارت معي بكون قاعدة بحكي مثلا، هذيك مرة كنت قاعدة بحكي عن بسس، حكيت كات لحدا، بفتح موبايلي بيطلع لي ad عن البسس. I actually searched it وطلع إنه في apps وإحنا مو عارفين enable microphone، بنعطيهم access to our microphones. فمرات بيكونوا يعني بنسمع ايش عم تحكي حوالين التليفون، هو بيكون الاب it's processing، بتكون عم تحاول تعمل إشي تاني بس it has access to your microphone. So be very careful with your devices, and this is all about creating awareness. يعني الواحد لازم يعرف عن هاي الأشياء ويوعي حاله إنه كيف صح data science و machine learning رح عم بتفيدنا، بس طبعا إلها أشياء لازم نحضر حالنا منها. واليوم على 5 في debate will is artificial intelligence a threat in the present or near future. وأنا ومستر أمجد رح نحاول نقنعكم إنه it's not a threat، لأنه as long as إنه إحنا واعيين ومتعلمين وفاهمين إيش هاي الأشياء ممكن تأثر علينا، رح نكون بالsafe side زي ما بيقولوا. sorry. ناقص. مم.
هلا اذا بدك تكون بالمستشفيات هاي الداتا بتعطي نصيحه للدكتور ايش يقرر للمريض.
مهم.
هلا اذا حدا اخترق هاي الداتا وعدل اوقات البيانات اشرح انت تحكي عن هاي المريض.
اكيد 100%.
كيف نضمن انه ما يصير تلاعب؟
هلا بنفس التكنولوجي نفسها لما يجوا يحطوها بيعملوا يعني precautionary moves انه يتاكدوا it can't be manipulated. في مثلا هلا تكنولوجي البلوك تشين، وبلوك تشين is basically a storage, it's a way of storing data. ومثلا كان في فريق بعرفه انه عملوا بلوك تشين to record نفس الشيء electronic health records and to make sure that they're not manipulated, especially for مثلا people who immigrate from one place to another, حتى refugees مثلا. It's all about taking those precautionary moves. يعني هلا انت بتعرف انه هذا الشيء ممكن يصير، فلازم تتاكد انه تاخذ الاحتياطات انه ما يصير. حتى بالمستشفيات يعني مو الكل، كثير صعب الواحد to access the data نفسها، يعني it's very very hard. يعني you need to go through many courses, many regulations. يعني it's really really difficult to actually change or edit this data. فهلا the thing is هاي الادit especially الادit the right to edit ما بيعطوها لكثير ناس. So I think most hospitals or the one that I've been to it's just read only. You can only read ايش مكتوب عن patient. ف they take الاحتياطات انه الواحد ما يقدر يغير فيها إشي. بس هاي طبعا يعني لازم نحمي حالنا منها، لانه كثير كثير خطيرة انه يغيروا معلومات المريض. صح كلامك 100%. يس. بسم الله. يس. سنغافورة. مهم.
ممكن مستقبلا الداتا هاي تصير سلاح في دولة تعادي دولة.
مهم.
أنا بتصور
مهم.
أنا بعرف كل المعلومات الطبية عن مرضى كثير في البلد أو عن ناس كثير في البلد، ممكن تصير زي ويبن.
مهم. مهم.
فكيف ايش بتكون احتياطات تقريبا نفس السؤال، شو الاحتياطات اللي تاخذها الدول بعد او التشريعات اللي تحفظ الموضوع هذا؟ انا بتصور انه ممكن فعلا يكون سلاح. لما يعرفوا عن عشرات الملايين البشر شو امراضهم كذا، ممكن يستهدفوهم باكلهم، ممكن يستهدفوهم بالادويه اللي بتروح للدول هاي. هل مثلا بريطانيا هل بلشت مثلا في تشريعات من الدوله على اساس انها تحفظ الداتا هاي ما تطلعش منها مثلا؟
هلا لما تكون داتا لمستشفى مثلا، هاي البروجكت اللي انا بشتغل عليها الداتا it's owned by the university و the government. الناس اللي they get access to the data they have to بيكونوا من الريسيرش تيم اللي بده يستعمل الداتا، يعني it's not public yet. بس هلا في خوف كتير كبير، هو مثلا مش بس حكومات، في خوف انه مثلا شركات الادويه to analyze معلومات المرضى، بعدين يصيروا مثلا ممكن يطلعوا امراض عن قصد عشان يصير يعلوا عندهم مثلا قد ايه الناس بيشتروا من هذا الدواء الفلاني. فهي it's a threat of course انه who has access to this data. فهي the who part is the important part. How do we make sure that the data falls into the right hands؟ لانه اذا الناس ممكن ياخذوها ويستعملوها ويستغلوها لاشياء بزنس بس عشان يكسبوا مصاري وعشان يعلوا البروفيت وهيك، بس عم بضروا غيرهم. ف it's all about again education و regulation من الحكومات انهم يتاكدوا they have the right processes to actually give access to this data. يعني it's all about awareness, education و regulation من الحكومات نفسها. و I believe انه UK at the moment especially باللي انا عم بشتغل معهم they're taking the right precautions. They're actually doing very well so far الحمد لله. يس. هو بعدين نيجي عندك. الله يعافيك. Thank you. Thank you.
AI is coming. It's now, it's not in the future. And robots are replacing people in many areas. Like in my field, many companies are replacing doctors and engineers with AI designs and applications. What's your advice for people who are currently working or about to go to university to enhance their career to deal with this?
It's a very, very good question. Actually, there's a report in the US that showed that 47% of jobs are going to be replaced in the near future. But it also shows that machine learning and artificial intelligence will create more jobs than the ones that were replaced. But the difference is that, which field are you in? Sorry.
I'm orthodontist, for example.
Okay.
There's a line.
Mm-hmm.
The clear alignment that you don't use. The biggest company is in Australia. And the one who does the treatment planning, the follow-up, everything is AI.
Mm-hmm.
They hire them. They are headhunting AI engineers from all over the world. And they are, no orthodontist is looking at the treatment plan.
Mm-hmm.
Just put the reports, the machines will do the planning,
Mm-hmm.
will scan, the models are 3D scanned.
Mm-hmm.
The AI will design the treatment plan. 3D printer will print out the clear aligners
Mm-hmm.
and it will go to the patient.
Mm-hmm.
No human
Mm-hmm.
involved in the models.
Mm-hmm.
And they are manufacturing around like 5,000. They are dealing with 5,000 patients a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's only one company.
Mm-hmm.
There's other like the radiology, many of the X-rays that are in the cloud are analyzed and recorded by
True.
the machines. So
Mm-hmm.
it's limiting the works in other areas.
True. True. So one argument is that it is limiting those jobs, but it's taking away repetitive tasks. So if I was in your shoes, I don't think that I would want to look at treatment plans every single day, but I think what I want to do instead is think of more like creative approaches to my job. So this is actually a big argument in machine learning, that AI is replacing the repetitive tasks. It's taking away the tasks that are actually time-consuming, and they're easier to do. They give better accuracy with the AI. So going back to your first question, my advice for especially the young people in the room who are yet to explore what they're doing is every generation has a different trend and there's a different fashion. And the trend now of our generation is AI and machine learning, and a lot of us are afraid of AI and machine learning. But we should actually take advantage of those opportunities to be up to date, to make sure that we understand what AI is and what machine learning is, and to use AI to actually help us in our jobs and then do more creative tasks and take more fuller advantage of our potential as humans. Because as humans, like the machine is faster, the machine has more memory, the machine has more attention, but the machine doesn't have emotions like humans. We might get there eventually, but at the moment it doesn't fully get there. And the machine is not as creative as humans. Creativity is one thing that machines lack. And there's another thing, on the treatment plan, there's a study that showed that one AI system, it took it like a few minutes to come up with a treatment plan, and then on the other hand, a group of doctors came up with a similar plan in 160 hours. So that's a lot of wasted time when the machine can actually just do this very quickly. So we should just, at the moment, develop our skills, make sure we're up to date, because as you said, 100% AI is happening whether we like it or not, and make sure that we're ready for the new trend of jobs. حكوا لي في 3 minutes to make sure we're ready to the new trend of jobs. هوقف كمان سؤال عشان 3 minutes. Yes. هلا برا احنا عم نشتغل عليها و it's easily translatable to research. يعني مثلا هلا اللي انا عم بشتغل عليه already هو في عندهم scores معينه، انا عم بشتغل على هاد، رح نتاكد انه بيشتغل صح، ويعني soon, very soon, in the next few years ممكن نحطه بالمستشفى. يعني it's already in clinical settings. practical، انه عمليه، يعني بتشتغل عليه وبتقدر تشوفه على طول بالمستشفى. Any other questions بآخر دقيقة؟ لا؟ Okay, thank you كتير, I look forward to seeing you at 5:30.